Okay, this is going to be a little discussion about the archetypes of places. So basically wanted to adapt Carl Jung's archetypes to a set of archetypical locations, just as kind of a fun writing idea. So let's review Carl Jung's archetypes. So here's 12 of the basic archetypes I've been researching. The innocent, the orphan, the hero, the caregiver, the explorer, the rebel, the lover, the creator, the jester, the sage, the magician, and the ruler. So I'm going to sort of create a archetypical mapping of all these archetypes onto places. And so what are all the archetypical places that are usually found in stories for these characters? So the innocent, they have like common or communal areas. The orphan has places of membership or belonging. The hero, typically you find them in competitive arenas. The caregiver is like a Garden of Eden where you can kind of grow things. The explorer will be found in the extreme locations. The rebel in places of conformity. The lover in places of connection. The creator, a place called the empty canvas. The jester or trickster are places where people are having fun, and crossroads where people are making decisions. Knowledge centers is where you're going to find the sage, and the magician, you'll find them at the magician stage or a metaphorical stage. And the ruler, you're going to find them at centralized locations of power. So let's go through some examples here. So first, places with assumptions of innocence, civilians in cities and suburbs. So typical in Marvel movies, apocalyptic movies, you'll see things like immediately the villain starts destroying common places, like going after the innocent to set them up as villains. And so these are just kind of common places where you'll find people that are innocent of any wrongdoing. And as a contrast, if you wanted to set up places where there's an association of guilt, you would build a wall. So places where there's a prejudice or assumption of guilt, we have places like prisons, places where communities are divided between, two classes or different religions, and that can sort of set up a presumption of guilt. Places of membership or conditional belonging would be for the orphan that wants to find some place they belong to, like a church or some sort of membership place, like a Shriners, or even other places like other membership clubs would sort of keep people out and just accept people based on their acceptance of rules and beliefs, I guess. And then there's sort of an antithesis of this, where there's kind of like unconditional belonging. If you're growing up in a very loving household, there's unconditional acceptance. And also some religions and organizations have soup kitchens, and that kind of freely give food away to anybody who needs it. So there's no prejudice or conditions associated with that. Let's move on. The hero, you'll find them at competitive arenas, like the movie Rocky. You'll find that guy in the boxing rings. The majority of those movies where the action's happening, race car movies where the hero has to make his mark, or war movies where they have to kind of sort of strive above the situation, and also competitive arenas like the Olympics. And so the antithesis of that, I was thinking of non-competitive areas where the focus is on cooperation and community, and the focus is on society, not on the individual. So like Amish farmers building barns, or like art museums or libraries. These are kind of places where the community is kind of doing a general good resources for everybody involved. Moving on, the caregiver, you'll find them at places like the Garden of Eden, I call it. So a hospital where they're a family home, a walled garden, or even a farm where somebody is kind of nurturing and helping things grow, or helping people heal. So this is also kind of, if you really wanted to showcase the caregiver, you put them in places of pain and destruction or anguish, when there's like in a war movie when somebody gets hurt, or in a traffic accident, or where people are trying to help the poor in impoverished countries, or torture chambers. These are kind of like not healing places where people are actually being hurt. Moving on, the extreme location, the explorer. So if you find very difficult places to get to, this is where the explorer is going to be, on places like the top of Mount Everest, in outer space, the dense rainforest, the bottom of the sea. These are where the explorers are trying to, prove their mettle. And the opposite would be mundane locations, places that are easy to get to. You're not necessarily going to find the explorer. This is the kind of place that the explorer has to escape from to kind of show themselves. Places of conformity. So if you wanted to create a rebel movie, you put them into the most conforming type of place possible, like a jail, a prison. In the Matrix series, you have Neo starts out working in a cubicle farm, or even schools with their regimented rows and columns of chairs. That kind of like showcases how much they can rebel against society or whatever structure. But places where the rebel really can't be singled out is places where I have chaos and without any rule of law whatsoever. So how is the rebel going to rebel against something that there is no structure to rebel against? Moving on. 7, the lover. Places of connection. So here's where I was thinking of places where people are connecting socially, and typically the movie Casablanca comes to mind, or Riff's Cafe Americain, where everybody kind of connects and meets up. There's like dance, disco places. There's people on their cell phones and cafes. This is where they're typically found. But if you really want to showcase the character of the lover, you put them in an isolated place where they're pining and longing for connection for people. Like, for example, some Disney movies, Tangled with Rapunzel, Frozen with Rivendell, and such, where they're trying to escape from their isolation. The creator. This is something I had to give some thought to. Where the creator can be found is where there's an empty canvas they can express their creativity. Like Edward Scissorhands movie, where he kind of creates all these topiaries out of the garden, or the kids at the beach making sandcastles, or in the Frozen movie, when Elsa finally gets free, she can, create her ice castle on this kind of frozen landscape, or kids playing with Legos. Like, starting from nothing is kind of the idea. And this kind of led me to where creativity is actually being destroyed. Are people burning books, or there's censorship, or kids are, given too much screen time and they can't allow themselves to be bored and create. The jekster or the trickster. This is like the Turkish ice cream salesman, are always kind of trying to trick you and take the ice cream away, or playing around like clowns inside a circus, or even a used car lot where somebody's trying to trick you to spend more than you really can on something that's really not worth that much. And that kind of contrasts where there are places with no kind of decision making. There's a dead end. This is kind of like where the trickster doesn't really have any tricks to show. There's only one way to go. Knowledge centers, the sage. So this is where people could acquire knowledge, or learn, or be able to experiment and try different things. So I put places like a library, a laboratory, art museum, or even sort of a gladiator training area where people can, try things out, make mistakes, and there's no wrong answer in some sense. There's an opportunity to experiment. And I kind of contrast this with the indoctrination centers, places where knowledge is lacking and ignorance is kind of encouraged, where they just say, nope, you just got to believe this set of rules and don't question why. And I can think of places like rigid religious structures, or military compounds, or even some martial arts training centers. They just kind of encourage one way of doing things. They want to stamp out their set of people. And moving on, the magician as an archetype, the place where they would kind of gravitate to is a stage to provide a clear view to demonstrate an idea to the audience. So in the world, you might see kind of these metaphorical stages where there are these great monuments to their society and their culture, like in France, or in the United States, or in Italy, or even on the moon. All these countries and cultures try to present their achievements that way. versus what we typically might find as a magician just on a magician stage. Countries kind of put themselves on a larger metaphorical stage. So the sort of the opposite of like these stages are places where people can't see clearly. Things are obscured or diminished, kind of blocking viewing angles. So when car companies are kind of come up with new cars, they try to disguise the car by putting on all these kind of contraptions on it. Or if you want to have a maze, you have all these obscured views. You can't really find the way through the maze successfully by looking straight ahead. You have to kind of map it out in your mind, and tunnels are kind of the same way. And finally, the last person would be the ruler, who can be found at the centralized locations of power in sort of the king's throne room, or in the Oval Office, or in Congress. These are places where people are exercising the power, and it's kind of given this grand feeling. But the opposite of this is when a dictator or a tyrant is overthrown, and this is kind of places where people have no power, like a prisoner being sentenced in court, a gallows, or a guillotine. These are kind of places where it all kind of comes to an end and the person has no power. So these are kind of the set of archetypes that I was trying to give life to these environments, and sort of see how Carl Jung's archetypes map to locations. And that's it. Hope you found this helpful.